Recovery is stupendous.
Achievable.
Hope.
Freedom.
Empowering.
It's unique to everyone.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Getting a new lease on life.
It's finding restoration after you fall down.
Recovery is having the freedom to enjoy life.
For me, it was finding a way to really love myself.
My recovery is possible in part because of my own sense of purpose.
Well, welcome to another Montana's Peer Network Recovery Podcast. Today we'll be talking about reframing our perception. My name is Bill Diesel. I'm the Membership Mentoring Coordinator for Montana's Peer Network, and I'm joined with...
I'm Amanda Walton. I'm a Peer Services Coordinator with Montana's Peer Network, and...
I'm Ashley McLean. I'm the Peer Support Training Coordinator for Montana's Peer Network.
So, reframing our perception. What does that mean to us today in recovery? And what did it mean to us when we weren't in recovery on how we dealt with our perceptions and how we viewed certain things during crisis, certain things just in our everyday life? What do you guys think? Where do we want to dive into here?
So what are you even talking about? You mean I can reframe something? I don't even know what you're saying right now.
So yes, we can reframe our perception of what we are going through with tools to be able to take a look at where we are and what we're going through to be able to understand more clearly the situation in front of us.
What? You mean I have stuff I need to think about? Just kidding. So that's kind of an example of where people are at regularly.
Yeah.
Prior to recovery, right? Not having the awareness or the understanding that we can take a step back and look at how we're perceiving others and ourselves and our environment, and that we can choose something different for ourselves. And that's a really big part. In fact, a lot of times when we, as a peer supporter, whenever I would provide one-on-one support, you have to kind of work up to that, because they would look at you, and you said this earlier, Ashley, somebody used this again, like you have 7 heads, because they, what are you talking about? So
Yeah. I don't know. I just, this was a foreign concept to me prior to recovery, because the furthest I got was it's everybody else, right? Everybody else is the problem. And I have, if everybody else would just act right, my internal state would be okay. And that's as good as it got for me pre-recovery. And as a person in long-term recovery now, I know that type of thinking kept me ill for a very, very long time.
Right.
So that skill is something that is definitely learned. And as we are in our recovery and we're going through situations, we'll find ourselves in situations where our thinking is negative and nothing's going to work out. But today we get to have the ability to, in that moment, reframe our perception. Where before, we didn't have that ability to do that within that moment. And to take it one step further than that, we also have the ability to reframe some of our lived experience, and our perceptions has the ability to change 5 years ago or 10 years ago of a situation that we have gone through, and we're able to reframe it and understand it in a different way that can actually help us in our recovery today, to help those we serve with perception.
Absolutely. Seeing things in a different way. I was I was held captive in my own mind. I was more of a prisoner within myself and at war within myself than I ever was on the in the outside world. So whenever I realized, that experience, I can totally see now how maybe the person that was who traumatized me, maybe their experience was different, maybe my perception in that moment. And I remember after I'd been reunited with my family after a period of incarceration several years ago, I was at a friend's house, and we were actually at her parents' house, and they were talking to me about how my husband and I had made it through, because we fell together and we came back together, right?
Mhm.
We were having this conversation about some things that had happened with my friend, their daughter, and her then husband. And in the middle of this conversation, I realized, and I even cried. And they were, what's wrong? Because I realized that something that I had remembered as a trauma in the throes of my youth, I had remembered a particular situation as a more of a domestic violence kind of situation of him like coming at me and like holding me back. And I suddenly, it's like this veil was pulled off of that memory. And I suddenly realized, oh my God, he was just trying to wrap his arms around me and get me to calm down.
Mhm.
And that one memory had held me, like I was stuck for a while on that. Like, how can I come back from something like that with somebody, I didn't want to be separated, but that one moment was life-changing for me, because then I was able to start looking at other memories that I had and maybe realizing that my traumatized mind might have been remembering things in a certain way. And especially when we're using, we don't always remember things the way that other people involved in the situation saw them. And, there's also the thing about intentions, somebody else's intentions. They may not be really trying to hurt us sometimes.
Yeah.
We may not be trying to hurt somebody else, but.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think there's a lot of areas in that story that I can relate to, and it just makes me think about like there's your story, there's their story, and then there's the truth, right? And sometimes like it takes me a while to get to what my truth is in any given situation. And that is a process, just like everything else in my recovery, like getting to see what my truth is, which ultimately I have to go within, right? Just step back. I have to go within and realize what my truth is. I was sitting with my coworker Bill the other day, and it's a tough time in my life, and so my perception of life is kind of grim and dark right now. And so not knowing at the time when this happened that I'm kind of in a rough place, I lash out on my coworker because he's chewing too loudly, right? And he's doing this to me on purpose because I've told him that I have this disorder that hones in on this stuff, but I've noticed, right, like my perception of my surroundings and who I am and what my truths are is that when I'm not doing okay, those little things like get me anxious, and I'm hypersensitive to everybody around me and how much they're pissing me off, right? And that has nothing to do with the people around me. It has everything to do with my internal state. And knowing that I can change my internal state it's easier said than done, right? And that to me is like my lesson in recovery is, all right, what was your part, Ashley? Right? Ugh, I hate that.
I can definitely relate to that. One thing that you were talking about, Ashley, was knowing that you have the opportunity to change that if you choose to. Sometimes I feel that's a double-edged sword, because then I have to be accountable once I realize that I can change my perception, that I can go inside myself and regulate what's going on, why am I feeling this way, what's really going on inside of me. Then I have a responsibility to correct it. And I can be honest and say, sometimes I want to stay ugly.
Yes.
I want to stay ugly.
Yes.
And I want to lash out.
Yes.
Because it feels good in the moment to do that. Now, you go back and you do some more reframing afterwards, and you're like, oh, damn it, I did it again. I shouldn't have done that. I knew better. I even consciously was aware that I chose to behave that way. and I gave in to that and I did it. And then, then you get to make amends and you get to say you're sorry. That's why I think it's a double-edged sword sometimes, because if you are aware, then you get to make a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to continue on staying in this frame of mind, or am I going to reframe it and choose to have a perception that can allow me to have a better outcome?
Right. And I think I like what you said about the double-edged sword, is because I don't necessarily in like the heat of a skewed perception moment, right? Like, I don't necessarily think that I have to correct it right away, right? Like, that I have to, like, I need to go through that, right? I need to go through that, and it's okay to not be okay, right? Type situation where I don't have to constantly be in a positive state all the time, right? And that is a skewed perception, right? Is that, oh, you need to have it all together and you need to be doing everything correctly and you need to be professional and you need to do all the stuff. And sometimes I just need to not be okay.
You bring up a great point, because a lot of times we get stuck in that cycle of positivity. And, we have this awareness, as if we've been on any kind of recovery journey for any period of time, we have an awareness. And whenever we keep going back through the same cycles over and over again, we start feeling stuck, and that's when we get disempowered and feeling like we can't continue. So when we reframe our perception, we actually reconceptualize our experience. And what that means is, we're going to take that awareness and we're going to go beyond that awareness, and we're going to start using the awareness of the tools that we have to reframe our thinking. And this is another point that I thought about. And behind every emotion, behind every word that we say, behind, every feeling that we have is a thought. And a lot of times when we're feeling, or when we're lashing out, when we're anxious, that is our body presenting a symptom, trying to tell us that we need to address something on the inside, right? And addressing that is not always going to be easy. It's a process. It is a journey in and of itself to bring the toxic thinking that we have suppressed so long that it's gone into our unconscious mind, and using mindfulness and meditation, getting ourselves in a more relaxed state so that we can bring that out from the unconscious mind into our conscious thought. Because we do have both pieces within us, right? There's parts of us that we don't even consider whenever we're going through a really, really difficult time. And by taking the opportunity to really look at what's going on inside of us, we can use the tools that we have, that we're aware of, that, oh my gosh, I've known this for so long. Why am I doing this and just keep bashing my head against the wall and going through the same cycles over and over again, relapse or mental health recurring symptoms, whatever it is that we experience. And whenever we get to the place where we're just done with that and we want to go within to change our outside experience, dig deeper within ourselves, and it's not an easy process. And it oftentimes will get worse before it gets better. So Bill, you talked about, sometimes you just want to be a jerk, right? Well, guess what? That's expected whenever we're going within, because our mind is trying to work through all of the crap that we've had buried for so long. Because what have we been taught? We've been taught, don't feel, don't think, don't talk about it, don't think about it, just get over it. Well, we can't get over it. We have to recognize and validate things that have happened to us and our feelings and our thoughts, because it's very real to us. And whenever we do that, we can then address it. We can release negativity, and so that positivity can have a place to go, right? Because whenever you release something, you leave a space, and that's where positivity can come in.
Yeah, I was thinking of the quote that I heard where it said, my only problem in this world is the picture in my head of how everything's supposed to be, right? And like, talk about perception, right? The picture in my head of how things are supposed to be. Not how they actually are, but how they're supposed to be, right? And so, I can should and would and could all over myself, but the reality of my perception today is that it just is, right?
I was thinking a little bit more about reframing our perception, and me and Amanda were talking last Friday about an event in my life that she ECPR'd me. And,
It's a great verb.
Amanda is good at ECPRing people when they least expect it.
And as a consequence of that conversation, consequence might be a strong word, but opportunity, I've had an opportunity to reframe particular events in my childhood. But what's getting in the way is my intentions. I'm having a hard time just allowing myself to live the event and reframe it without wanting to hold on to anger or bitterness. And how am I going to reframe that? What am I going to do with that? What am I going to feel like when I don't get to feel anger anymore? There's these thoughts and feelings of, well, I'm letting him get away with it, and it's going to happen to me again. And it was 40 years ago. And so when Amanda says it's not easy, it's because to rethink and reprogram and allow yourself to have a different perception of an event is unfamiliar. And for 40 years, I've held on to this event in a certain way, so I'm familiar with the way I'm going to feel and how I'm going to react to it. And so my intentions, because I don't want to have the negative perception that I have of myself because of it, to let go of it is still hard, because I want to hold on to what I'm familiar with.
Yeah, it makes me think of like how sometimes our perceptions are based out of fear, right? And the opposite of fear is like blind faith, right? Knowing that the way that I believe is that everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be at this moment, right? And that is so hard to kind of accept sometimes, even though I have strong beliefs about that, but it's hard for me to accept when they're unpleasant or negative experiences in my life, right? Yeah.
So what happens through those experiences? Like we get caught up in the memories, and whenever they come back and they haunt us, we relive them over and over and over again. And that's where the anger and the bitterness and the sadness and the madness come into play, right?
And innocent bystanders.
But what happens when we tell ourselves, you know what, I don't have to be an active participant anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I can watch this like I'm watching a film, and I can put myself in that space in my head and let it play through, because while we may experience emotion strongly, even whenever we're watching a movie about trauma or whatever, something that might trigger just a feeling of sadness or happiness or, pain within ourselves, we don't relive everything over that we've experienced in our lives over and over and over again because of the movie that we're watching.
Right.
And that was one thing that that was really helpful for me, actually, was realizing that, you know what, I'm no longer an active participant in this. I'm not that person anymore. I am not a victim. I am not helpless. I am not hopeless. And I can be the bystander.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, like if you're out there listening and you're, a person in early recovery or you're a person in long-term recovery, for me, like this reframing my perception and knowing that that is a choice that I have in life today has been a process, and it takes practice, right? Just like everything else in my recovery, it's a process and it takes practice. So if you listen to this podcast and you're like, oh my gosh, I can reframe my perception. And then you go out into the world and you try it and you took one step forward and then a couple steps back, doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, right? Because it's practice, repetition, and just like enjoy the process because everything's a process.
In line with that, just a reminder as well that it will often get worse
Yep.
before it gets better. So we will have the perception that we are backtracking when in fact we're actually making progress.
Yeah.
So, that's the expectation that something should be changing right now immediately because that's the kind of world that we live in and what we believe should happen is also something to address with the whole perception change because healing is a process. It is a journey. It is not the same for any two people.
No.
And to see improvement, we often have to go through hell first.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been great, guys.
I think it's been awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for another recovery podcast. If you want to be a guest, email Jim or Ashley. And I hope you got something out of this. Some thinking, some wheels are turning. Change your perception.
Have a good day, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery works. Recovery is possible.
Recovery is possible.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery works and recovery is possible.
Recovery is possible.